You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Come under our umbrella and take comfort in these hot months. Just like the Lovin' Spoonful says that it's hot town summer in the city. Back of my neck feeling dirt and gritty. My goodness. But under the umbrella of the Shoe In Show, you can get not only great information, but get some fashion information on what maybe you should be wearing to make sure your feet aren't going to burn on that pavement that's out there. Matt, obviously summertime, big summer sellers, sneakers obviously, but this is sandal season. It is. So I feel like we got to talk about sandals.
I think it's a requirement of our job description. We must talk about them.
I guess I'll add that to my LinkedIn profile. Sandal.
Didn't the woman at the beginning tell us we should talk about it? I can't remember. She's our overlord. She tells us what to do.
I quit listening to that voice just like I quit listening to Reducer about 4 years ago. So we'll just see where this takes us. But this episode, spoiler alert, trigger alert, is on sandals.
All right. Remember that episode we did just as a throwback where we were actually acting like we're on a beach and we had that? Yeah. That was fun.
That was awesome.
Talked about sandals then too.
That was fun. Yeah,
exactly. On a private island.
Exactly. But as we look at the marketplace, and obviously we all know sandals are selling, we need to bring on some experts here to actually look at the numbers and the data and see what's happening. Because it's like one of those things where you can't comp, and we've had problems on a number of issues, but you can't comp this year to last year just because of COVID and what happened with demand dropping off. So it feels like every time we say there's another season coming up is going to be the biggest season ever. And I mean, it kind of is in many ways, with Americans having more savings, more money in their pocket than ever before since probably World War II, against now a reemergence where they haven't really been purchasing that much stuff, where now they need to purchase that stuff unless they want to get their feet burnt, which as a Southerner sometimes that happens. So who do we got today to talk to about sandals?
Well, we have our dear friend and colleague, Gary Rains, who's our chief economist. And one of the things I love about Gary is that he takes really complex kind of economic data and boils it down to phraseology and Southern, quips and other things that make you laugh, while at the same time driving truth to power, if you know what I'm saying, Gary. So, Gary, one of the things that you have helped us do is really figure out, okay, how do we catalog using data? How do we figure out what demand is for certain product categories? And then taking that, how do we overlay that on top of import data so we can see whether or not, based on demand, do we got enough inventory to feed that demand? And the answer to that question this year has been, for a lot of people, the answer has been no. And so you did something really interesting with sandal data. And if people want the report, we'll be happy to send it to them. They can just email us at info@fdra.org and put Sandal report in the subject line. But Gary, talk to us about what you did with sandal data and what that data has told us about inventory levels, particularly at a time when sandals are in high demand.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting look. There are not very reliable estimates for supply and demand of something like sandals. So a way we had come up with to try to get at these measures of supply and demand was by looking at imports on the supply side and by looking at online searches using Google, Google search engine for the demand side. The idea being, if people are searching for sandals, have an interest in sandals, then is likely to portend demand for sandals. And certainly on the import side, since the vast majority of sandals are sourced abroad, that tends to be a pretty good predictor of trends on the supply side. So certainly, both the imports and these Google searches for sandals are highly seasonal. We see on the search side, that the searches tend to spike around every June and tend to bottom out every November. That just makes good sense. Like Andy said, those hot summer days, that's when people are outside, maybe going to the beach, out on the town, be wearing sandals in the summertime, and not a whole lot of demand other than those diehard college kids, wearing sandals in the wintertime, it seems. So we see that seasonality is really pronounced, from year in to year out. Over the long term, we've also seen, as of course we see more and more people doing more and more business, or at least more and more research online. We've seen that this demand for sandals has increased over the long term. We've got about 17 years worth of monthly data, and we can see that the within each year, that distinct seasonality, but then from year to year, that the search volume for sandals has only tended to increase. Now, of course, Google is a little cagey that they don't release the search volume itself. Not saying that there's X number of searches one month and Y number of searches the next month, but rather what they do is they take the time period you're looking at and take the highest ranking month and set that equal to 100. Every month less than that is set at some ratio of that. So say if June is 100 and May was 50, of course that goes to say that the search volume in May was only 50% of however much it was that next June. Well, sure enough, here in 2021, as we've come out of the pandemic now, we've seen that search volume for sandals has really exploded. In fact, reaching the highest monthly volume on record this month in June 2021. Well, we took that demand side and overlaid it with the supply side, looking at imports. Sandal imports also are pretty seasonal, from one year to the next, tending to peak around March or April and tending to bottom out usually about 6 or 8 months later. Well, when we overlaid the two of those on a graph, we could then lag the sandal imports for about 3 months. Again, because like I just said, they tend to peak around March or April, and the searches tend to peak around June. So if you lag those sandal imports about 3 months, the seasonality tends to fit very closely between one another, to where you see those seasonal highs and those seasonal lows on the searches and the imports tending to correlate very strongly with one another. Taking this a step further, while that's great over the long term, we notice more particularly over the last year or so that the sandal import volumes just have not rebounded quite as sharply as what we've seen this record demand for sandal searches. In fact, in this latest month, while the April numbers showed that sandal imports had increased sharply from a year ago, we have to keep in mind where things were a year ago. Just in the early days of the pandemic, as we saw ports and storefronts really shuttered, there really were very, very little sandal imports coming in. In fact, in this latest April, it was the second lowest April volume for sandal imports in 20 years. Again, second lowest from second only to the year ago April. So with this search volume in April this import volume in April still relatively low, but the search volume at the highest on record, we've seen that not only in this latest month, but really over the last year or so. The presumption is that demand is really outstripping supply for sandals. And we suppose that is likely to contribute to really tighter inventories and an inventory to sales ratio at a number of footwear retailers selling sandals, and that we believe that is likely to have some price pressure to support sandal prices deeper into this summer selling season.
Tell us how you really feel about sandal demand.
So we got shortages. And it looks like we'll have them for a while, which is interesting. In some ways, I take a look at this because when we look at different product categories and we talk about the majority of shoes, 99% being made overseas, to a certain extent, you could do sandals in the U.S. or closer to the U.S. if you had problems with like porter shoes in China or whatever. Like you did mold injected sandals, you could do more here in the U.S. There's a couple of suppliers in that way, and I wonder if that segment is really one of the leading segments looking at diversification elsewhere, somewhere else around the world, to try to be able to get their product in with a lot more ease. Maybe have to pay a little bit more than they do somewhere in China or something like that, but at least have the supplier, the diversity of supply coming in, and not have disruptions or issues. I don't know.
Yeah, every month we, of course, publish a monthly import a look at a range of different types of footwear, including sandals. And to your point about maybe is it possible for mold injected sandals to be produced domestically? Perhaps so. But the sandal import numbers take into account a range of different types of sandals that really run the gamut, men's and women's, and of course a range of different categories within that. Everything from flats and zoris and flip flops and heeled sandals. Sandals with and without thongs. It really runs the gamut. Everything from low end to high end products across the spectrum.
Gary, you talked about the seasonality on this report that you've run on sandals, and it helps you kind of gauge the import numbers. Can you do it with products that don't have seasonality built into them? What are the limits of using this technique to understand demand versus inventory, and maybe what are some areas that we should explore even beyond sandals?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're really just beginning to dig into this. We've used the Google search feature for some time to measure these different trends across a range of keywords. And really, anyone can go in for free into Google Trends and look up any type of keyword you're particularly interested in. Perhaps it's a particular category of footwear, or even a particular product of footwear. Brand name. You can certainly search for that and see how those searches have trended over time, and if there's any particular seasonality in your product. To your question, we've looked at a range of different types of footwear, and we'll be exploring this further in coming months. We have to put out a number of different white papers, short little briefs that dissect this issue a little further. Looking at a range of footwear, a couple that come to mind offhand: formal footwear, dress footwear, certainly cleats, seasonal cleats, whether it's soccer in the spring, football in the autumn. We see ski boots and snow boots. Obviously, tend to have a big increase in search volume over the winter months. So we're going to be exploring this a lot further in coming months across a range of different types of footwear, and I would encourage folks to stay tuned for that.
I wonder, it's a little scary to talk about scarcity in the marketplace, right? And for so long we'd be like, oh, the inventories are so much, we got to figure out how to offsell all this excess inventory, and what are we doing? It's killing the price. And now all of a sudden it's the complete opposite, where it's like, we don't have enough inventory. Is this going to upset the customer that they can't find what they want? And how do I get my hands on more inventory? It's it's a little scary to be in that situation where you're talking about scarcity for a number of products and services. And I guess it speaks to, and I wonder, Matt, you talk to a lot of sourcing executives out there, but is it getting to the point to where we talk a lot about lean manufacturing and just in time, and we got all the supply chains, years ago, trimmed all the fat out, and now we can deliver it and it's there, and we don't have to pay, we don't have inventory issues with the warehouse. It's getting out, that kind of churn now is, do we need to build up reserves more than we ever have to make sure this doesn't happen? I mean, how do we balance?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy. And I've always said inventory is an art, not a science, because it's just too hard to know. It's too hard to have such, if we all had the ability to demand plan to an extent, we could down to the pair know that we would unload it, then the industry would be a lot more efficient, a lot more profitable, but that's just not the case. And inventory is our company's biggest expense. So managing that is of utmost importance. The other thing that brings to mind is inventory levels are low, is there's so many companies that have relied, or retailers that rely on the off-price channel, right? It's the Ross and the TJ Maxx and the Burlingtons of the world that rely on this extended inventory to be unloaded by these brands into these channels. And when that dries up, one of the most popular parts of our business right now is the off-price channel. And when you have inventory drying up, the question comes down to what's going to trickle down to those places, and that remains to be seen. But I don't know, building up reserves is capital. It takes capital to do that, right? And if you're in a capital saving environment, or you're looking at container rates that are 4 times what they typically are, then you're probably trying to do this bring in as much or as little inventory as possible to meet the demand as best you can. But again, there's people smarter than me who struggle with this, so I don't know what the answer to it.
Yeah, it's a tough one though, because we talk about how back to school season is going to be the biggest ever. This holiday season that's coming up is probably going to be the biggest ever. So if holiday season we talked about this last year. I was like, I know the sales are going to start before Halloween. It's going to be really weird. You're going to see discounting on holiday sales and elf on the shelf right next to a witch on a broom.
Kill me now.
But if you're forecasting ahead and you're saying, okay, like we're going to have the biggest holiday season ever, and we've had this problem with inventory, maybe not long term do you build up reserves, but do you look at your partners and say, hey, I know typically we're like ramping up in this month, but we got to start a month earlier.
Yeah.
Just to see what we got.
Yeah, it's a good question. The other thing I've been worried about is freshness of product, right? Because we had all this inventory last year and no demand, and the prevailing wisdom is that people are just dumping this inventory, and so last year's trends are this year's product because of COVID. But I talked to a major retailer just the other day who said that the product they're seeing for back to school, the product for the fall is fresh. It's a testament to how the brands have been able to pivot on the product development side to the digital space, not being able to get over to Asia, to be more in direct connection with their factory suppliers on product development. They use digital tools, and what the expectation being that product would be stale and a rehash of stuff we've already seen. At least in the family channel space, that has not been the case. And so I think what's interesting is that back to school, from those I'm talking to, at least sounds like that there's the inventory to meet demand, and that's good news. Now, that's not sandals. We started this conversation talking about sandals, but when you think about athletic, outdoor, family, children footwear, stuff for school, that stuff's going to be well stocked. And I think, again, that'll play right into what is going to be a huge back to school season.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting too, because the other part is not, the inventory ties into it, but we've been talking a lot about inflation issues. And Matt, as you've pointed out, it's not that people are raising prices at retail. It's just they're doing it with the discounts. Mm-hmm. That typical buy one, get one half off, that buy one BOGO, second one is gone. 40% gone, like maybe 20% still here and there if you got to move stuff. But it'll be interesting to see like what retailers do for back to school season to gain eyes and foot traffic in the stores against their competitors. Because I don't think there's going to be a discount war where people go down, down, down. I think it'll just be, I don't know what it'll be. Maybe it'll be like reward points or something like that. It'll definitely be a little bit different.
Yeah, Gary, what do you think about the inflationary question? Because, as a layperson listening in, you're like, oh my gosh, prices going up. I see these prices. I see stories about it. But on the back end, how's that impacting margins for footwear companies? As we think about currency, as we think about container rates, we think about labor. One of the things you've talked about, which I think is really interesting, is that with inflation comes this I quit momentum about people leaving their jobs. And I didn't know there was a correlation between the two. So kind of talk to our listeners about the inflationary aspect of what's going on.
Yeah, sure. As the saying goes, rising tide, raises all ships. And I think an issue that we're seeing here is this inflationary pressure really across the spectrum on the wholesale side and on the retail side. So on the one hand, looking at retail, the shopper in the store is seeing higher prices for everything from groceries to certainly, footwear. But on the wholesale side, those shopkeepers, those distributors, those suppliers, those manufacturers are seeing higher input costs, whether it's higher manufacturing costs, the shipping costs you mentioned earlier, or as you just said, the higher labor rates. And certainly you tend to see those higher labor rates correlate with higher quits. As wage rates are a bit higher, folks feel better about quitting their job and looking elsewhere. And I think that's an issue we're likely to see last much deeper into 2021.
Take this job and shove it, Andy. That's what people are doing.
Well, I mean, I've been threatening for weeks now to quit this job at FDRA and go work for McDonald's where I can get a $500 signing bonus. So now I'll just rejoin FDRA. I don't know how long I have to work to get that $500. Like if I go to Wells Fargo to open up a checking account, I got to spend like $3,000 in 3 months. Okay, I get that. How many burgers do I have to flip to keep the $500?
A lot, my friend.
Do I have to
a
show
lot, I would think.
Day?
I've seen places giving out iPhones. You get an iPhone.
Well, maybe I'll just put a temporary freeze on my employment here while I go there to get the 500, and I'll be
kind of like the campaign days when we worked on the Hill. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, exactly right. Exactly.
You can do that in August. You can go take a sabbatical at McDonald's.
Hey, when I come back, I may be 10 pounds heavier, but I'll be $500
There you
richer.
go, my friend. There you go. Big Mac.
Folks, this is the Shoe and Show where we talk about all things footwear. And this conversation started with sandals and then went in all different directions. But this is a typical conversation we have in our virtual offices as we all sit somewhere differently these days. But it's typically what we talk about is the shoe marketplace, what's happening, and the dynamics and the conversations we have with the executives, bringing that exclusively to our members and anecdotes and ideas to the full industry to try to strengthen it and think a little bit differently about what's happening out there and ways forward. Of course, we have a range of events on these topics, on inflation, on supply chain issues, sourcing issues. If you go to FDRA.org, you can find out about those. And we bring on industry leaders and we talk about those ad nauseum to find new pathways forward to help people boost their business. So we encourage you to join those events. Members, every Tuesday at 2 p.m., we cover some of this stuff and discuss these things. Please join that. If you're not a member, I don't know who you are out there. There's 95% of the whole industry is members. So the final 5%, whoever the 5%er is, like the 1%ers, we're coming for you. All right. You'll probably be getting a call from me soon. We'll cut you a deal, but you gotta come in the fold. Yeah, you can come to my McDonald's and I'll give you a free Big Mac if I can sell you on an FDRA membership. But as always, shoeandshow.com is the website. We're on all podcasts, audio podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. So, and spread the word. Subscribe. Give us 5 stars for the great content that we just gave you today and the laughs and the jokes. But we appreciate you listening as always. If you have ideas or tips on what we should be talking about relevant to your job or your segment in the marketplace, let us know. Drop us on shoeandshow.com. There's a contact button in the bottom left. You can leave us a voice note to tell us how much you love us and the show and what you want us to talk about. But until next time, good luck finding sandals. Get your vaccinations. Come out to Fanny reemergence in August as the industry starts to get together, dipping its toe in the water, and then the full renaissance in December, Fanny, is definitely going to happen. So we look forward to seeing everybody there. If you need anything, drop us a line at FDRA.org. We're happy to help. We're here to serve the industry. As always, thank you very much. And Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit FDRA.org.